Welcome to The World This Week, Episode 5, in which Consortium News looks at the week's events. I'm Joe Lauria, the editor-in-chief of Consortium News. This week, the Ukraine war. Western publics are turning against it. But what about Trump? The Middle East. Netanyahu strikes out in D.C. But again, what will Trump do? The World This Week, Episode 5. This week, we're joined very happily by Ray McGovern in conversation. Ray is a former Russia analyst at the C.I.A. and a daily briefer of presidents, and by Patrick Lawrence, a CNN columnist, author, a former editor of the Asia editor of the International Herald Tribune. We welcome Patrick and Ray to This Week. Patrick,
thank you.
And Ray, thank you again for being here. Amid the signs of democracy are dangerously breaking out everywhere in the world last week, Western publics are no longer wanting to fund the war in Ukraine. A jury acquitted Palestine Action activists in London. The High Court of England and Wales ruled that the Starmer government's designation of Palestine Action as a terrorist organization was illegal. More Epstein revelations expose Israel and members of the ruling class, and thousands in Australia protested the genocidal president of Israel, his visit there, until democracy was blunted by the fists of the police. Ray McGovern, thanks. Let's talk first about Ukraine. The Munich Security Conference is starting right now. Simplicius, the anonymous blogger, writes that the purpose of this, again, is to stir up hysteria in Europe, to continue the war going. But he points out that support for the war and is plummeting in Europe for spending, military spending. 40% of French and 30% of German publics last year supported spending more on the military to help Ukraine. And right now that's down to 28 in France and 24 in Germany. What's going on here, Ray? Are the publics finally going to tell their leaders in Europe in particular what to do about Ukraine?
The leaders seem to be a little far apart from the populace. The leaders have their most interest in staying in power and defending their abhorrent behavior.
Are the public finally going to tell?
Whoops, we're getting too. Should I just continue? Whoops, can't hear you, Joe.
One of you has
with
the show.
Ray, I'm going to have to ask you to just pause a moment because we have an echo. Somebody seems to have the program open.
No problem.
Just look on your computer, Ray.
Is there someone with a tab open that's playing the program back?
Well, I have this fucking panel that says floating reactions.
That's okay.
And I don't know how to get rid of it. Should I push OK just to get rid of it?
I think the echo is gone now.
Is there someone with a tab open? No.
No.
That's... When someone with a tab open. No. That's... Well, it's not me, Cathy.
I don't suppose it could be me.
Okay, I apologize to the audience for that technical problem, which is live TV. I think it should be okay now. Ray, I was asking you whether the time has come for the Western publics to finally get through to European leaders that they want this war to end.
Well, that time has come years ago. The problem is that the leaders of Europe, Merz and Starmer and Macron, they are divorced from the people and they have all the power that they need to stay in office. So it's going to be maybe another year before they give in. What happens now, and which was really manifest at the Munich Security Conference, is that the U.S. is backing out of Europe, is backing out of NATO. took no other than Vladimir Putin to point out that NATO is nothing without the United States. Britain may have 7,000 troops. They're not sure they know how to fight. They have no navy worth the name. Uh, in other words, the Europeans are trying to keep the United States in NATO and Article 5, which requires a reaction by all if one is attacked, in being. The problem, Joe, is that finally people got to realize that no sweat, no problem, keine Angst, no big anger or fear. The Russians aren't going to invade Western Europe. I mean, there's no evidence that they would want to. There's no evidence at all that they had that in mind. And when you get a person educated and still living in the Cold War days like Joe Biden, who says in his last inaugural address, does anyone in this room think that Putin will stop in Ukraine? No, yeah, going to Poland and the Baltics. Well, there's no evidence for that. As a matter of fact, most people need to know this, okay? Putin already stopped, okay? He stopped 6 weeks after the invasion of Ukraine. They had an agreement, his negotiators and and the Ukrainian negotiators, they initialed this agreement, which called for Ukraine agree not to become a member of NATO. There would be a ceasefire. There would be limits on the forces on each side of the ceasefire line. They'd deal with Crimea and the other big territorial questions later, but there'd be stop the war. So, it's not a trivial matter to say, hey, Joe Biden, Russia stopped in March, April of 2022, when, 6 weeks after they started. And who put the kibosh on that? Boris Johnson, working for Biden and for the British leadership at the time. So, yeah, this business about Russia stopping, Russia presents no big threat to Western Europe. And once the West European leaders understand that, or their people make them understand that, they'll breathe a big sigh of relief and say, oh, wow, we don't need to build up our military. We don't need to wait for 3 years until we're ready to attack or to defend ourselves against Russia, because it's a red herring. Literally, it's a red herring. Russia has no intention of taking over anything other than the part of Ukraine that they feel is necessary to preserve their own core interests. That's clear. They've almost got that now. For the longer term, they need more. That's why they're willing to cajole these people. What's his name? Sel the negotiators that are now coming from Trump, the two Trump's
Witkoff
son.
and his son-in-law.
Drawing a
Yeah.
blank on Witkoff's name. Witkoff. So that's why they're going to start on Tuesday and Thursday once again. Will there be immediate progress? No, but they want the U.S., and this is really different from the old days. Okay, they want the U.S. in Europe. Okay, not so that Article 5 will apply. No, they want the U.S. in, because the U.S. is the only force that can ensure that the whole objective of this war, namely that there be a new security architecture which does not threaten Russia with Ukraine in NATO, that will have been achieved, and these people can kind of say, well, we did it, or they can claim that they did it. Trump will no doubt brag that he did it if it's done during his tenure. So it's all kind of red herring, and it's I mean, the truth does come out. The question is how soon it will come out, how many more Ukrainians are going to die on the battlefield or freeze to death.
Well, Biden, you say Biden was, along with all European leaders, now banging this drum that Russia wants to take over Western Europe. But at the same time, they're ridiculing the Russians for not being able to take Kherson province, or still fighting to get Donbass 4 years later. And then, yeah, at the same time, they're going to be in Paris by Christmas. I mean, these people, which one is it? Is Russia a threat, or are they a bunch of hapless soldiers who are losing badly on the front? Patrick, do you think that the public Is that the key, that the European publics will have to turn these people out of office, will have to oppose the continuation of the war? Do the European peoples believe that Russia is a threat? Or they've stopped believing that?
Well, European political cultures are not quite as atomized as American political culture. People are still capable of uh, getting out on the street, and more broadly, they're still capable of discerning reality and making judgments. To an extent, many Americans, perhaps most, aren't. Okay, um, so I think the big sale in Europe is to persuade them of the need to the core question here is dismantling the European welfare state, um, more or less completely, or at least more extensively than has occurred to date, right? And uh, you know, Rubio gave a speech today. You brought it to my attention before we assembled here. Really quite remarkable, uh, asserting that that sovereignty has been outsourced, national sovereignty has been outsourced to international institutions. And these institutions, the UN premier among them, have proven ineffective. And while outsourcing their sovereignty, have spent wasteful amounts of money on massive welfare states. That's his phrase. Okay, and this has to stop. I think he's basically making the European argument, the Germans most explicitly, but not only the Germans, French too, Brits, what we now account for as core Europe, um, that they're going to have to cash in the welfare state because of the frightening Russian threat. The Russian threat serves this purpose. I count it one of two. One is to dismantle the welfare state and persuade people that they must do without in order to uh, defend themselves. And the second is, what is the purpose of NATO? Well, NATO, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone assembled tonight, and probably not our audience. NATO has been wandering for years, right? Wondering what it is supposed to do. I read the Rubio speech, and my mind went right back to that line of thought that began with Twain, Lodge, and all the anti-imperialist people at the turn of the last century, on the occasion of the Spanish-American War and all that fell out from that, right? Right up through W.E.B. Du Bois. The equation is this: you can have empire abroad, or you can have democracy at home, but you cannot have both. This has been shoved on Americans for a very long time. And I think what we're witnessing in Europe right now, to conclude my remarks, is the same thing. You are going to have to give up democratic arrangements of all sorts, uh, social programs, economic programs that serve citizens in order to defend yourselves. And you must take this threat seriously. And I think it's an excellent thing. These numbers you mentioned earlier, Joe, these the cause is collapsing slowly, right? If you walk around in Germany and France, you can. It's tactile. It's right there. But now we have it in polling numbers and so forth. I think the wind is blowing in the right direction, but I'm kind of with Ray. Who knows how long it will take, right? I will conclude by saying Europeans know how to get off the sofa a lot more swiftly than Americans, right?
Well, Ray, we it seems like we're on a hamster wheel here with this story because after Alaska, there was excitement and Russia thought they'd actually gotten somewhere. And now I think they're totally flabbergasted, the Russians, about what Trump is all about when it comes to Ukraine, let alone other subjects. Where do we stand with this? Is Trump serious about ending support for Ukraine? He has now pressed Zelensky to have an election by May. This is his latest deadline. This is kind of what Trump does. He throws out these deadlines, and then when they happen, he forgets that he ever gave them sometimes. But Zelensky at first said apparently, or was reported that he would have an election by May 15, I think was the date. And now he's updated that to say only if there's a ceasefire will he have an election. So where does Trump stand, Ray? I'm asking you an impossible question to read this madman's mind when it comes to Ukraine.
Red lines and deadlines uh, don't have much substance with the
Yeah,
Trumpster, right?
yeah, yeah.
That's just that. Uh, Beyond that, I, I've been reading very interesting things coming out of Moscow the last couple of days. Apparently, there's a considerable divide in Moscow, um, uh, delineated simply this way. Kirill Dmitriev, the chief negotiator with Witkoff and Jared Kushner, he's a finance man. Okay, he's a financier. He's okay doing transactional negotiations and all that sort of thing. He thinks, no, we have to take these Americans seriously. Uh, it's called the Alaska model, right? And on the other side is Lavrov, um, for my money, the most distinguished foreign minister walking around today, who is saying there is no point dealing with these people at the mahogany table. These negotiations are pointless. And I think that's quite a considerable divide in Moscow. Um, I'm with Lavrov on that, to answer your question. I don't think the Trump people are. First of all, I seriously question how much authority Trump has. You know that already, Joe. And I just, the Americans are parrying the Russians, and Zelensky is parrying the Americans. That's where I come out on this.
And Ray, where do you stand about this May 15 election, and where exactly is Trump thinking right now? You had some optimism a while ago. Do you still have some?
Uh, I continue to believe that Putin is a really sharp guy, okay? I continue to believe that he knows what he's doing. And when he very ceremoniously, before his own National Security Council, said, look, Mr. Trump, this is the 22nd of September last year. The New START treaty expires on the 5th of February. We're willing to keep the aggregate limits on offensive missiles in place for another year if you agree. So let me know if you agree, and we won't have to worry for another year. Maybe you can even negotiate something. Now, I saw that and continue to see that. I continue to see that as a litmus test. Okay, if Trump, all he has to do is say, okay, he didn't have to renegotiate anything. He didn't have to say it in public. As long as he said, all right, that makes sense. Let's keep limits on offensive strategic missiles as these limits are provided in the New START treaty. He either couldn't or he just didn't want to say yes. Okay. Now, in the immediate days before the deadline, February 5th, Medvedev, the former president who negotiated New START with Obama, and every Peskov, Lavrov, Ryabkov, all of them had a day to say, look, this is really important. There's still time. There's still time. It's still 5 days or 4 days, 3 days, and they made it very clear that this is really important to them, and Trump couldn't deliver. So that's big because the only way Putin, can read that is that Trump is not his own man, or he's deceiving us. We'll have to see how this works out. So that was the divide. Now, Lavrov was has completely been not so much polite here. He's been saying we betrayed our NATO, were betrayed up the kazoo, okay? And yet, all of a sudden, you got, well, wait a second, are they going to end these negotiations, trilateral negotiations foreseen in Alaska way back in August 15th? Yeah, they're going to do that. Are they going to send uh, these guys back up to Abu Dhabi, I guess it is? Yeah, they are. When? Tuesday, Wednesday. So what does Trump really want? What I see is a coincidence of views here, of intentions, okay? Trump wants to be able to end this war. He blames it on Biden. He says he wants to stop people being killed, okay? And he's got a reasonable blame to put on Biden. And what does Putin want? Well, most of my colleagues seem to think Putin doesn't have a brain in his head because he's been taken in that Trump really doesn't want it. The U.S. is not going to make any concessions. Putin doesn't need any U.S. or Ukrainian concessions. He's won the war on the battlefield. John Mearsheimer says this will be run on the battlefield. Correct. Medvedev, the former president, says that's only step one. We would be foolish if we didn't go right to step two, which would require a reordering of the security architecture in Europe. That's what this is all about. So, yeah, we've won the war on the battlefield, but that we want more. Now, why do I mention all that? Because to achieve that, he has to have the United States cooperating because the Europeans are from hunger. they're out of it. They just don't make any sense, okay? So you have this curious development where even though missiles are shot at state property there where Russian presidents live or stay sometimes, even though you have assassinations in Moscow. And most of my colleagues would say, oh, that's it. That's it. Now look how lawful. Well, they're still going ahead with this stuff. Why? Because they're naive? No, because Putin says, look, these guys are deal makers. They're really attractive by economic deals. Now, most of my economic friends or economists tell me there's very limited room for a burgeoning in mutual economic relations with Russia and the U.S. But look, they're looking long term, and the Russians would like very much to get a tunnel under from Alaska to Siberia. That's possible. Now, the technology would let it be done in about 5 years, 3 years if you give it to the Chinese to do. Okay, so these things are inducements, and Dmitriev is working with Witkoff and Kushner, and the Russians have said in their publications just this week, said there's a dual track thing here. Uh, we have Putin in touch with Trump now. That's big, and that's good. But meanwhile, we have this other negotiation thing with these people I just mentioned, and that's making progress too, slowly but surely. We've won on the battlefield. Uh, we don't want this thing to end up where we would be tempted to take over all of Ukraine. For God's sake, that would be our Vietnam. So we need a deal. We need a cordon sanitaire. We need a buffer zone. They talk about a buffer zone. And who are you going to work that out with? Real estate people. Okay, so don't demean real estate people. Some of my best friends are real estate people. They can do this kind of bargaining. So I'm not pessimistic. I'm saying, oh, damn, the Russians will read the failure to accept this offer made in September of last year to keep those limits on the START treaty, the new START treaty that expired on February 5th. That's a real blow. That's a big blow because now Putin has to look over his shoulder and people are going to say, well, look, these guys aren't serious. They want us to spend them ourselves into oblivion. They got an EBM and all this stuff. So he's got to say, well, okay, we got to do our own thing, which we have done over the last decade. And then what that means is building incredibly sophisticated systems that can go around the South Pole, that can use a nuclear power generator to make these missiles flow, can stay up in the air all the Oreshnik, Burevestnik, all this stuff should be deterrent enough. It is sad, though, that the U.S. will now be hell-bent on building offensive capabilities as well as forlorn things like the Golden Dome. How good was the Iron Dome in Israel? Not real good. Maybe people will be more impressed by a Golden Dome.
Can I ask a question here, Ramo?
Sure.
Uh, one of the remarkable things about the Western position is that they seem to want to reduce these diplomatic contacts to square miles and hectares in eastern Ukraine, and Western security guarantees, which seem to me to be very far-fetched because the Russians have been very clear they're not going to have NATO members. They're not. You can't say, okay, no NATO, but NATO member troops. That's not a winner either. But the Western, they have. I want you to correct me. They seem to have completely stopped talking about the security framework that is the the very root of all the root causes the Kremlin talks about. Is there any discussion of these whatsoever?
Well, it's a real mess, Patrick. You get Zelensky saying 3 weeks ago, 100% agreement with the United States on security guarantees. You get the US saying, and you get the Russians saying, forget about it. We don't know anything about this. We have a role in this kind of thing. Security guarantees against whom? We started this whole damn war so we could be guaranteed security and not have NATO on our border. So what I hear you saying is a reflection of the mass media in the West, and they'll say what Zelensky says 3 weeks ago. Then they'll say, oh, now the Russians have rejected that, and Trump is not clear on this. What we have to depend on, and this is really a slim read, is what Trump says. And, he said, I think on that plane going down to Florida for Thanksgiving, he said, the time has come to cut a deal. They're talking about this square acreage in Donetsk province. I mean, the Ukrainians have to realize that the Russians are going to take that over anyhow, and probably another month or two. So do they want to deal then, or should they deal now? They should deal now, and they should come up with the best deal that they can get. Now, that's easier said than done, but if the Ukrainians depend on the Americans, as the Europeans used to, there should be enough leverage for Trump to honor his promise to Putin in Alaska in August, to sit on the Ukrainians, to sit on the Europeans, and make sure that they do a deal with or without Zelensky, and they don't allow Zelensky and the Europeans to sabotage the progress that they thought had been made in Alaska.
A deal on the security framework of all Europe?
When we talk about security guarantees, what you were referring to, I think, is the claims that Zelensky needs these before any ceasefire. This is step one.
No, I'm talking about a new security architecture between Russia and Europe, and more or less Russia and the West.
Yes. Well,
this was terrifically, I thought, raised in the 28-point plan that Trump, under Trump's name, above Trump's name, was issued some while ago. But I haven't heard a syllable about it ever since. And the 28-point plan became a 20-point plan. And now there's no discussion, so far as I know, of NATO's relationships with Russia, none of that.
No, Zelensky is talking about a security guarantee completely separate from that. He's not
That's what
interested
I
in a new
mean.
architecture for Europe. No, Ray's talking
Yeah.
about that if there's going to be a ceasefire or a deal, somebody's got to secure Ukraine. The Europeans want to
Yes.
send troops.
Yeah.
Now the
I'm
Americans,
talking
that's
about the
totally separate.
larger.
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
talking about
Okay,
the
good. Let
larger
me pick.
security
Yeah,
Yeah.
situation.
let me pick
And
up on that.
Zelensky's just not talking about it.
Well,
And if Trump did want to talk about it, I think the national security state, if that's your preferred term, would not in a million years allow it any such negotiations
well, let me go
to
back to a little
proceed.
history as to how the Russians look at this. In the middle of December 2021, they presented a draft treaty both to the United States and to NATO, saying, "Look, no Ukraine in NATO, no the kinds of missiles that will hit the kinds that we used to have before the INF treaty, and all kinds of other restrictions. That's what we'd like to have." Now, the Russians never got an answer from Tony Blinken, and they were really upset. And actually, the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, previous president of Norway, answered it this way just a year and a half ago before the European Parliament. He said this. He said, "The Russians, they presented us with a treaty, and they said, no Ukraine in NATO. And if you keep trying to get Ukraine in NATO, we will have to invade Ukraine." We said no. And so Putin invaded Ukraine, quote unquote. And then Stoltenberg says, but we got NATO enlargement anyway because we got Finland and then we got Sweden, so we got two. For Ukraine, maybe we get that later. So here is Stoltenberg owning up to the fact in a kind of strange way that the whole idea was to prevent Ukraine from becoming part of NATO. That has been achieved now because the Russians have won the war in Ukraine. Now, it's not necessary, in my view, to go 3 steps forward and say, oh, yeah, they'll never get NATO to agree to the kind of security agreement that they had in mind at the beginning. But here's what happened. After Putin talked to his defense chiefs on the 21st of December, 2021, okay, and he said, look, the the Ukrainians don't have, the West don't have hypersonic missiles yet. And he said this to his military, but they're going to get them, okay? And when they get them, they're going to put them in Ukraine. And when that happens, I will have 4 to 5 minutes to decide whether to retaliate, use nuclear weapons, okay? 21st of December, 2021, okay? What happens? 9 days later, White House gets a call from the Kremlin. Mr. Putin really likes to talk to Mr. Biden right away, and the answer is, well, wait a second. They just talked 10 days ago, and there's going to be negotiations in Geneva in just 10 days from now. So wait, please. President Putin would like to talk to President Biden. Oh, it was Christmas time. Biden was home alone in a place called Delaware. I think I got that in Delaware. Okay. And to his credit, he takes the call. What was the readout? The readout was the President of the United States agreed not to put that he said that the U.S. has no intention of putting offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. Read read out on the 31st of December. New Year's Eve was never so joyful with the likes of Yuri Ushakov, who's still Putin's main man on this. He was saying, finally, the Russian, the Americans are noticing that we have core interests, and this is a big one because we have 8 provisions in that draft treaty. This satisfies 6 of them, for God's sake, okay? What happens? Well, they go to Geneva, and Wendy Sherman, and meets with Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister, and Ryabkov says, oh, wow, this is the 9th and 10th of January, 2022 now. And Ryabkov says, let's spell this out, how we will not put offensive strike missiles, you will not put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. And Wendy Sherman says, huh? What would you say? I don't know anything about that. Long story short, finally, Lavrov, the foreign minister, gets a hold of Blinken in Geneva on the 21st of January, 2022. He says, Tony, what about this? What about your president's commitment not to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine? And Blinken says, forget about it. You know how that happened. I wasn't there. Sullivan wasn't there. He was home alone. And no, forget about it. Look, we might be able to talk at some point about how to limit the number of offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. But forget about that. And so the next conversation on the 12th of February, just what, 9 days before the 10 days, 12 days before the invasion, what's the readout of that? The President of the United States refused to discuss the undertaking he made not to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine, and he refused to talk about the possibility of Ukraine not joining NATO. That was the readout from 12 February 2022, and we all know what happened on the 24th of February after the Winter Olympics were over in China, and after Putin had secured Xi Jinping's nihil obstat, saying, okay, yeah, if you got to do, you got to do, which was a surprise to all my Chinese friends, analysts, okay? So there's an alliance now, we can call it an alliance between Russia and China, that is tighter and more monumental and a bigger change in the structure of international relations than ever before, and it's come into play now with respect to the threat on Iran, and perhaps we'll get into that as well.
Well, you can file that story under Biden/dementia, the one about him telling Putin on the phone that he's going to not put those missiles in. But Ray, the 30 minutes that we've been talking about this tells me one thing, that the diplomacy on this war, it's futile to even talk about it. I think I didn't even know whether we should pay attention to it anymore, because it doesn't matter what Trump says or doesn't say. It's all on the battlefield, as you said. This is being won there, while all this nonsense is going back and forth. Uh, and ultimately, war sometimes is about real estate, and there are real estate people that Trump is sending over there. It is, as we just mentioned, as Patrick raised and you discussed, about the security issue. Russia is not about, it's not about real estate so much. He didn't want to take Donbass if Minsk had been
Exactly right, Joe.
adhered to, and it wasn't adhered to. So ultimately, it's got to come down to that treaty, the December 21 treaty that was rejected. And until that's accepted, the war is going to continue, and they will take more territory. But Ray, when would it stop? Or Patrick, at what point do you think Russia would say they're satisfied? I mean, you'd have to then worry that NATO is going to come into Ukraine. I don't see the end of this war, is what I'm trying to say. How do you see it ending on the battlefield?
I don't right now.
Yeah.
I don't think. I think it's a big mistake to assume that Russia wants this war to continue, and I think it's a big mistake to assume that Russia wants to push westward any further than its stated intentions. It doesn't want a lot of bother with Ukraine. It certainly doesn't want to get involved with all those neo-Nazis in the western part of Ukraine. It's a mess over there, right? That's not Russia's intent. But they bang on about root causes for a very good reason. I don't think they're going to stop until they are able to begin negotiations in a serious way on a very new and quite comprehensive security framework that is well beyond what Zelensky's talking about. They're talking about a new relationship between Russia and the West. And the problem is the West has no intention of shaping such a new relationship. That's it. So I think we're in for we're in for a more or less. It's so discouraging to say this, but we're in for a more or less indefinite conflict, wherein the Russians will proceed westward. The idea that they, quotation marks, can't even take Donbass is just MI6 claptrap. They could take Donbass anytime they wanted. They're doing this very delicately and a little at a time, and they're in absolutely no hurry whatsoever, given the collapse of the AFU, Armed Forces of Ukraine. And I've just been reading the radical collapse of public morale among Ukrainians, however many may still be there. So I just don't, the problem is not Russia. The problem is the West is not serious. Okay. The one time Trump, the occasions when Trump tried to address Russian concerns, I greatly approved. But he will be permitted to address them only so far before he is stopped. And basically, the document, I can't remember the date of that document, the 28-point document, that was pushed aside, but quick, right? Rubio had a hand in that. So, it's going to go on, and it's not Russia's doing that it's going to go on.
Those 28 points, Patrick, but just talking points. Dmitriev drafted them. We know that from sensitive intercepts. And he negotiated them with Koff and Jared Kushner.
Yeah.
They were just a series of things they put down on a piece of paper, and they were taken seriously by Putin to the point where he spent 5 hours from 11 o'clock until 4 o'clock talking to them about it. Now, he explained himself. We went through every point. That's why it took so long. It was awful. It was far too long, but we covered almost all those points. And they were in a big rush because they wanted to go to what was Abu Dhabi to get these other stocks. So we spent the night. So what I'm trying to say here is that what you say is right, or what I think we agree on. The Russian military has pretty much won this war. So the demilitarization objective that Putin spelled out right at the start of the war is about to be achieved fully. Okay, there will be no military worth the name in Ukraine. What does that mean about denazification? Well, that's a little tougher because about 20 to 30,000 troops are under the Azov battalion or brigade or division or what they call it now. Under those are Nazis. Now, how are they going to be handled? Well, what Putin calculates, in my view, is that we have to keep the Americans in this because if we want the kind of security guarantees that amounts to a new architecture in Europe, then the Americans have to be part of it. The West is no more. We have Rubio yesterday or today saying he's too busy to attend the meeting that the NATO people had arranged at Munich, at the Munich Security Council. He was too busy to go to the last NATO foreign minister meeting. NATO is not a thing for Trump, nor is it a thing for Putin, who has said specifically, look, Western Europe is nothing without the United States, and they should come to recognize that. And I'm saying that they will come to recognize that. So what's the outcome here? The outcome is Putin, put myself in Putin's place, he has a choice. Whether it works or not, it's worth the effort. You get Dmitriev, you get Ushakov, you get Lavrov when he's available, you get them talking. and we're talking through secure channels. This is good. This is 100% better than with Biden. By and by, they will realize that we've won the war, and that, as Trump himself said, if they don't come to a deal now, well, they'll have even less territory to bargain with. So it makes sense from a strategic point of view to be cautious, but to keep the ties open with the United States, even if they can't agree to a simple thing like continuing the limits on New START for another year. Still, there's a degree of rapport now that didn't exist before. Putin can call, he can call Trump and say, Mr. Trump, um, we are giving you the guidance little packet in one of those drones that attacked my residence, or the Russian president's residence, near Valdai. Okay, we're giving that to your defense attaché in Moscow. Look at it closely, and then tell me if it doesn't show exactly that we were the target, that Russian property, that president's house. Okay, that was 2.5 weeks ago. Now, do you think that that guidance package would be CIA specific, or would be traceable to an entity in the US proper? I don't think so. I disagree with Scott Ritter on this. I think it'll be NATO kind of thing, and it could be just as easily the British that gave this to the Ukrainians to fight. So, but in any case, Putin sends this to the White House. And how does the White House react? It doesn't, okay? Except in secure channels. That's one of the big things here. You won't find Russia or the United States, except when Trump forgets himself, talking about this thing with bullhorn diplomacy, as the Russians call it. They're doing it on the sly. There's a lot more to doing it rather than not to have these ties. The Russians are patient. Nothing exactly is going to happen real soon, but they can wait. And when the battlefield is won, what I'm saying is, I'll just permit me one more quotation because it matters what major Russian leaders say. Here's Medvedev. He was the one that signed New START. Okay. Here it is. Quote, Russia will soon win military victory in Ukraine. But it is equally important to think about what happens next. After all, the goal of victory is to prevent new conflicts. This is absolutely obvious, okay? So if you're looking to understand why Witkoff and Kushner and Dmitriev and even our Secretary of the Treasury have been involved in these second track negotiations, you'll see that this is what's necessary from the Russian point of view to think about what happens next. That's much more important now than the inevitable military victory. Military victory is going to happen this year, okay? What happens next? Well, Putin takes the long view, and we're very lucky to have a perspicacious statesman leading Russia during these days.
Well, it remains to be seen what a one battlefield looks like then, and exactly how long that's going to take. But I submit that Trump is an irrational man, and to try to rationally analyze him is a very difficult thing to do. And we just don't.
I was trying to examine Putin, not Trump. I
Right.
agree
Well,
with you.
that's a
Trump is
different.
by definition unpredictable.
Yeah. Well,
But there you have it. Putin knows that quite well, and Putin is trying to make the best of that
right.
situation, as well he should.
Yeah, flattery, humoring, that's what the leaders dealing with Trump have to do. But ultimately, Trump can decide to cut off the intelligence and the arms,
Mhm.
as he could to Ukraine. He hasn't done that. So that's why I don't take seriously
Joe,
any of
Joe,
this. I
Joe, let
can't.
me jump in. Let me
Yes,
jump in, Joe.
yes.
Do you really think Trump can decide to do that? I don't think Trump
He
can
can
decide to
decide
do
to do that, but whether that's done or not is another question. Whether it's implemented is another question. That's what you're asking, right? He can
that. Yeah.
decide that. Maybe he has decided that. We don't know. Maybe he's given orders and they've been disobeyed. We don't know this, right? But
Hmm.
that's another reason not to take seriously anything coming out of this guy's mouth. I'll give you an example, just to move on to another slight subject, but related. We're talking about somebody told him what BRICS was at some point. I don't know whether when he entered this At one point, I think it was at the beginning of this term, in one of those early encounters with the press when he was signing all these damn executive orders, somebody asked him about BRICS, and I think he basically said, "What's that?" So he didn't know what BRICS was. Well, he has subsequently found out, and now he just met with Modi or spoke with Modi, and they've agreed on a trade deal. India and United and Trump went on Truth Social and he wrote that great deal, wonderful deal. I am lowering tariffs on Indian goods from 50% to 18%, and in exchange, India has agreed not to buy any more oil from Russia. And as we know, first, there's a lot going on there. Russia and India have had a long-standing relationship going back to the Soviet days. Number two, the economic war that the West tried to launch against Russia, in which why they provoked, in my view, this invasion by Russia was so they could do the information war and the economic war and the ground war. And they're losing all of them. And one reason they were losing the economic war is that Russia found other partners, particularly for their oil, India being one of the most important ones, China certainly as well, but elsewhere. And now, if India were really to turn their back on Russia and say no more oil, that would be cataclysmic for India. So he's put in a difficult situation. Modi, is he going to be doing this or not? So it turns out no one has said this except Trump. Lavrov the other day made a statement. Only Trump is saying that India is not going to buy any more Russian oil. India has never said that. They've totally ignored, and now Trump is not saying anything. So the man is out off his rocker. So,
Yeah.
if you guys have any views about this, this is a perfect example.
Look, Trump says these things that they're not worth the paper they're not written on. Trump is the only one. Trump is talking about negotiations with Cuba. He's the only one talking about negotiations with Cuba. He's talking about this and that and the other with the Iranians. He's the only one talking about this, that, and the other with the Iranians, right? You made the point a few minutes ago. It's very difficult to read this guy, say nothing of discuss this guy, because he's just a loose cannon, right?
Well, look,
Americans have not, in all my experience in Asia, Americans have never, I can't understand this failure, have never understood the Indian principle of non-alignment, which goes back to Nehru, right? It's chiseled in granite, right? And they will never compromise that. They're certainly pretty good players in the fields of diplomacy, but that's not ever going to be on the table. And one administration after another comes in, and we're going to pull the Indians to our side against the Russians. No, they can't even pull the Indians to the American side in the case of China, which is a vastly more complex relationship, right? Rather more volatile. And so I think this statement about the oil, these sort of things, they evaporate into thin air after a few days, right?
that's the point. That's the point. He lies a lot. I mean, you guys are really eloquent in explaining to people what we all know, that Trump lies a lot. Now, what I would ask you to do is put yourself in Putin's place. Trump has his fingers on the nuclear codes. In my view, Putin is as perspicacious, as cautious and sensible person as we're ever going to get in Russia. As a matter of fact, I know something about Russian history that we ever have had in Russian history. Putin has built up Russia for the last 25 years into a very, very modern society. They're doing well. Their economy is okay, despite what you're hearing from the West. So I'm Putin, and I'm saying, my God, this guy is unpredictable. He's mercurial. That's why, of course, we never wanted him to win in 2016. The CIA analysts that were overridden had it right. We preferred Hillary of all places to Putin and all of it, and not to Trump, and Trump got elected. So So here I am, Putin. I'm trying to say, well, what's the best approach? Best approach to a delusional narcissist is to be nice, okay? And that's what he's done. He said, does Trump, somebody, does Trump deserve the Nobel Prize? Well, who else is there? In other words, he wants to keep an even relationship with Trump, all the while making sure that Trump and his military people know that Russia has the counterweight, has the deterrent that they've always had on the nuclear sphere. But let's see if we can play this guy. He's really in pleasure. He's really in treacherous territory in the United States. I don't know if you watched the testimony today, but the 34, 37, I guess it is, names have been released. And guess who's the major perpetrator that Kash Patel, the FBI director, excised from those records? His name was Donald Trump, okay? He's in trouble deep right now, and Congress is going after him. So if I'm Putin, I'm going to say, well, we're winning in Ukraine. Uh, Trump himself realizes that we're winning in Ukraine. He's got to, in our view, sit on the Ukrainians that don't have any real sponsors except those crazy Europeans. And by it's going to work out okay. Meanwhile, don't make fun of me, Putin says, for keeping ties with the United States with people who deal in economics like Dmitriev. Dmitriev went to Stanford. He went to Harvard. He's got a PhD. He's an economic wizard. He speaks fluent English. And this is the guy that deals with Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and including the Secretary of the Treasury in the last round of talks in Miami. So let's keep this going. And yeah, people will make fun of me for thinking that I can trust Trump. I don't trust him, but we're going to keep these things going. Witness the fact that on Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, the Abu Dhabi talks, the trilateral talks, which did come out of Alaska, which Trump promised that he would try to facilitate, and finally he did get Ukrainian people to come. So the trilateral talks proceed. Will they achieve a lot of success? Not right away. Not right away. But all I'm saying is this is a very calculating, gradual guy. He's got his head in the right position, and to think that he expects more from Trump, well, no, he's got to treat him really, really carefully. But if good things happen, good. If they don't happen, well, we're no better off than we were before we invaded Ukraine, except we do have our border farther toward the west, and we'll just have to deal with a messy situation rather than the kind of negotiated deal that Trump might help us by putting lipstick on the pig of defeat on the part of Ukraine and Europe.
Well, you just had a good segue to our next topic, where you brought up that the Russians actually wanted Hillary Clinton. They didn't want Trump, which was the heart of the Russiagate issue. And you brought up Epstein just now, that the names are released by Pashkatel. That you have to tell us more about, because that's happening and we're alive. But if you saw this Pam Bondi meltdown at the House investigation into Epstein the other day, she went absolutely nuts, and he was accusing Democrats on that panel for the impeachments, these phony, fake, flimsy impeachments that have incensed the Trump people right now. And there's no question they want revenge for Russiagate. Russiagate still lives with us. I think it permeated that hearing. It's the Democrats themselves have damaged themselves with the Russiagate story, because they tried to get somewhere on Epstein, and we all want that to happen. So I think most of us will be on the side of the Democrat and the Republicans, like Massey, who want to get to the bottom of this. But Russiagate is then bored its way into that because of the anger that she showed there. I don't know if you guys have any views about that, because you're both two big experts on Russiagate. So I wanted to know if you have an idea about what happened there with Pam Bondi.
I'll just tuck in briefly here, Joe. The problem with Trump's cabinet is a gathering of buffoons, okay? Hegseth, Kristi Noem, Pam Bondi, these people, they're small town nobodies, right? It's absolutely stunning that they are in these positions of influence. The problem is they're behaving very badly, and you use the word revenge. Trump has used the word retribution is coming, right? And they are abusing these institutions, FBI, justice. It's another topic, but Homeland Security, left, right, and center. The problem is, it is completely understandable that retribution and revenge are on their minds. That the abuses we witness daily now are egregious and right out in the open, and the jaws of America are dropped. But the abuses at justice did not begin with Donald Trump. That again, I come back to this phrase. The problem is that one has to understand why retribution and revenge are on the minds of these people. And I won't say it's justified, but it is certainly understandable. The Biden administration radically abused the Justice Department, the FBI, the intelligence apparatus. Where do I stop, right? And so that's my thought, and I'll pass now on this question. But it didn't start with Trump. A huge house cleaning was necessary. It's really unfortunate that this pack of people are in a position to advance on these institutions. What was really needed was principled, qualified people to do a serious, fundamental, responsible cleanup. Instead, we're getting one mess followed by another mess, right?
Absolutely. This is the mess of the extreme partisanship that we have seen since 2016, and it manifested itself in that Bondi hearing. We want to see, I think Ray agrees, I think you will, a lot of us want to see Adam Schiff, Brennan prosecuted for what they did. Why? Because the intelligence services interfered in the domestic politics of the United States. That's what has to be
Yes.
stopped. It looks like we were defending Trump. We weren't defending Trump. We were trying to argue against that happening for future president. That's a principle that cannot happen. You can't have the intelligence services
We were
interfering
defending
like the
Ross.
FBI and the CIA. Yes. So that's why we want Schiff. We want these people prosecuted. But what it turns out to is that looks like she's trying to deflect from the Epstein files, which she was, because that's going to nail Trump. And while those were flimsy impeachments in the first term, ridiculous impeachments, an impeachment now would not be ridiculous. A, for whatever is in Epstein, but B, most importantly, Gaza and genocide. Brave McGovern.
Well, Gaza and genocide should capture our attention more than anything else. I'm a child of World War II. I was born a week before the Russians invaded Poland. What I remember from my early days, what happened to the Jews, the Holocaust, and in 1948, when I was all of 9 years old, I remember big parades in the Bronx, the Jews celebrating that finally a land without people was being made available to a people without a land. And I believed that crap for about 20 years until I got maybe a little slower than others, all right? Now, I remember, the reason I mention this, I remember this thing, because sometimes you remember things when you're 9, 10 years old. And when I heard about the Holocaust and read of all those things, I said, when I get big, I'm not gonna let that happen. Okay, that's never gonna happen. Well, now I'm big. I'm big, and I've been trying to sound the alarm and trying to expose the American people to the fact that, yes, just as the Nazis acted this way toward the Jews are acting, or the Zionists, I should say, are acting that way in Gaza. And Trump and the American government is supporting that with money, with weapons, with political support. It couldn't happen if we didn't help the Israelis. So I just want to say that there are very few people who stood up to that. One, Aaron Bushnell, who was given the Sam Adams Award last year, said, look, people asked themselves during the Holocaust, what would I be doing? What would I be doing? Well, Aaron said just before he said fire to himself, you're doing it now. You're doing it now. Getting back to more mundane things, nobody knows more about Russiagate than Patrick here. Joe, you're a close second. I think I may be in a tie with you, okay? But the American people don't know about about Russiagate. They never got the full story. So let's not proceed on the assumption that the American people share the revenge aspect that many of Trump's supporters have. What I'd like to, I think it was just before I got on here, I was watching that wonderful representative from Washington, Jaya Powell, that's her name. She was interrogating Kash Patel, and she went through the list of 37 names that Kash Patel stamped secret, not to be published, on the grounds that they were a danger to security or ongoing investigations or that. And she read out most of the names, and she saved the last one, the 37th, to the last. And it was
Ramo, this is breaking news. Tell us some of the bloody names. Who are they?
Donald J. Trump, who, if memory serves, from what she said, traveled to the island more than anybody else except Epstein himself, and blah, 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 and was accused by 6 or 7 young girls or whatever it was. In other words, the die is cast now. They've got Patel, somebody within the FBI is giving these official documents, as is permitted by law, to the oversight committees, okay? And the oversight committees have these binders now, have these folders full of things that shows that the FBI director lied through his teeth on this, namely that Donald Trump was excised from this list of people who habituated Epstein and were accused by many of the women, some of them sitting in the testifying room, okay? And the other thing, of course, is that he was alone in the FBI building when I forget how many terabytes of information were deleted in a process that required 6 or 7 overrides to make sure that no backup computer could have them. Patel was in the FBI building during those hours. Nobody else was there. It's clear from the record he had an active hand in deleting these files. Last but not least, Epstein, he committed suicide, right?
No.
Bullocks, okay? The Congress also has the curious evidence that all of a sudden all these video cameras went off at the same time, and there was a crucial minute or two where nobody knew nothing about what happened in that cell. There are all kinds of other circumstantial evidence that he did not commit suicide. Crazy, okay? So those 3 things, Trump is going to be under the gun now. If I'm Putin, I'm going to be watching very carefully so he doesn't go off half-cocked like in Iran and try one of these wag the dog sort of things on Iran. And I try to prevent that together with my Chinese colleagues, which they are actually doing right now. But, Trump is in deep, deep kimchi, as we used to say in the Far East, okay? And the impeachment stuff, what the Democrats tried with these false testifiers from the CIA and everything else in impeaching Trump, that was a charade. That was awful. Now, will they do that uh, with Trump? Well, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Trump is, in my view, on his last legs. So the question is, what might he be tempted to do? And if I were Putin, I wouldn't want to be in the position of trying to safeguard false flags, safeguard wag the dogs or whatever. I would really be very, very gentle with him. I would say, yeah, you should get you could get the Nobel Prize still if you come around on Ukraine, if all this kind of stuff. Putin's willing to do because he's a statesman. That's how you treat an illusionary narcissist. And what did I hear today that he's going to name something else after himself? Like, you have it there. The man is not well, and that's something big to deal with.
And
I think
Pence,
Chinese
Pence,
and the Russians are doing precisely that now with respect to Iran by giving Iran support that we don't know about, but we're likely to find out about if Trump goes off half-cocked.
Joe, can I ask you a question, Joe?
yes, you can.
Where do you think this is all going to go? It seems to be busting open big time now with these names, and Patel uh, caught uh, perjuring himself. Uh, where do you think it's going to go?
Well, first of all, it was Penn Station that Trump wants to name after himself. The Moynihan Hall, the new station they made in the post office next to the Penn Station in New York. Just to put that aside, where do I think this is going? I'm reminded Mike Gravel, of course, who I knew very well and wrote a book with, and he told me that the Pentagon Papers were made available to members of Congress to read, but they couldn't take notes. They could just go in a room and read it and then leave. Of course, he used the speech and debate clause of the Constitution to read the Pentagon Papers into the record as Ellsberg had given to him, and nobody could touch them. So I'm reminded of that because apparently the members of Congress have been allowed to see the unredacted names, right? I suppose
Right.
the deal is they can't say anything, but they could use the speech and debate clause to name them on the House floor or the Senate floor. They cannot be
Hmm.
questioned, the Constitution says, for anything they do. So they could break the deal and that's it. So I'm hoping that's what's going to happen. And we're already seeing some of that. I think Ro Khanna and Massey have both been putting out names, and now you're telling me these 37 names are out. Um, I think more and more is going to come out. This thing is getting huge, really huge. Now, former Prime Minister of Norway has resigned earlier today or yesterday because of this. We saw what happened to Andrew. It's just going to start happening in the U.S. The rot that's at the center of this. I mean, I covered the UN for 25 years, so I put United Nations in there, and I see that Epstein's flying into Newark Airport one morning, and he's going to be at the UN at 9:15 to meet Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and Kofi Annan. What was that about? So this guy has been everywhere. He was involved in everything as an intelligence agent for Israel, and he was in the middle of so many things, and this thing is unraveling now. And Trump had to give, and I have to, the theme of this show was at the beginning, I talked about democracy dangerously breaking out, where the people don't want funding for Ukraine anymore, where we're going to talk in a little while about Palestine Action, where these guys were, the jury disobeyed a judge in Britain to acquit these Palestine activists. And then the High Court in Britain said it was illegal to designate them as a terror. Something's happening now. And I think the MAGA people really forced the hand of Trump and with Massey to release these documents. I
Do
think this
you,
thing may go much further than any of us ever imagined. To answer your question, Patrick,
okay, are we headed toward impeachment or the 25th Amendment, do you think?
very likely. You heard Ro Khanna say he thinks the British monarchy itself could fall. When you, I mean, this is a U.S. congressman talking about the British monarchy possibly falling because of this. The king has to answer questions. Yes, I
That'd be a
think
good idea.
impeachment or 25th Amendment is very possibly. This thing is blowing up, and I think they've lost control of it now, and that's the
Do you?
interesting thing. I
Do you?
think
Do you?
that Trump and Patel and Bondi, they've lost control of this, and in the driver's seat of people like Ro Khanna and Thomas Mass. And I think we're going to see more and more. I think that the rot that people always knew is at the heart of elites who run the world, the kind of sick people that have always throughout history gained power. Maybe we're going to really see something happen here. What it leads to, will it really change? Will there be reform? Will new kinds of people get into power? This is way down the road. But at the moment, I think we're going to find out things we never imagined we would. And we are already.
It,
What do you think, Bray?
Well, I see the last couple of days of testimony as being similar to the discovery of the tapes, the
Gap.
uh, Watergate tapes. Okay,
Yep.
all of a sudden, one of the trustees came forward. So, oh, there were tapes and tapes. Okay, well, that was the downfall of what's his
Yes.
name, Nixon, right?
Yes, Richard Nixon.
I see this happening, but I don't see a Congress like the one we had then. I don't see a Sam Ervin.
Mm.
Massey and O'Connor are are to be commended, but can they bring along the rest of Trump supporters and the Democrats who are afraid to go to the bathroom without asking people like Hillary Clinton? I don't know. So, yeah, it's come to the kind of pass where evil is shown to be so prevalent among the 1%, uh, that I think there are enough Americans that feel this shouldn't be allowed to simply be not held accountable. So it's more hope than expectation on my part, but we certainly have the means now. And if you need icing on the cake, do look at Jayapal's testimony today, the congresswoman from the state of Washington, and see how Bondi reacts to her interrogations. It's complete disrespect. It shows that the executive thinks it's above any accountability. And it's also stupidly fresh, you know. There's no respect at all shown by Bondi. And I think the American people might be able to relate to the fact that, this is really not the way to conduct affairs. Uh, the legislative branch is actually the first branch in the Constitution. It's the people's representatives. Bondi, those people are executive people, and judicial people might come up. So I don't know exactly. You and Patrick are much more attuned to domestic politics than I am. Patrick asked you the question. What do you think, Patrick?
What do I think?
Yeah.
Well, I've mentioned this in conversations with Joe before. One of the more dangerous words among correspondents is should. This should happen, and I can't count the number of journalists who have written, it should happen, so it will happen.
Hmm.
We know what should happen. Everybody gathered here now knows what should happen, and probably everybody in our audience. But I think it looks to me, I'm not a student of Washington the way Joe is, but it looks to me like one of the major impediments, and I think you may have just touched on it, is the composition of the Congress. Um, the control of both houses is a very serious problem. Maybe this means the midterms will prove to be, and they're not that far away the way these things are counted. Maybe the midterms will prove to be a real moment when things flip. I don't know, but I like to listen to Joe when he says they've lost control. That's a really good thing to hear, right? They've lost control. So if they've lost control, who is in control? The deep state? Nobody, right? I don't know. It's a great question, and what makes it a great question is it's hard to answer. I don't know.
I think the genie's out of the bottle. I don't think they could put it back in again. That's my strong impression from the events of this week and the revelation of names coming out. I think we're going to hear more and more people in Congress who have seen the names. And Trump is the big enchilada, obviously. He's the big prize, only because of the power that he has. And plus, he's named in the Epstein files more times than God is named in God's book, as one of the congressmen said, holding up the Bible. Right?
Very good. Very
It's
good.
mentioned more times than Harry Potter is mentioned in all the volumes of Harry Potter. And of course,
Well,
yeah,
I hope you're right, Joe.
he's going down. I think he's going down. I think the Republicans are realizing, Yes, and the midterms are the key, Patrick. You're absolutely right. This guy's an albatross on their neck. They got to jettison this guy. This nine, eight
Yeah,
months
yeah.
until this is 8 months to have impeachment. And I think they obviously need two-thirds of the Senate, which is Republican controlled. But if they realize this guy is really bad news for the Republican Party, for they
Yeah,
have to
that's
look at their
important.
own skin.
Yeah,
First rule of every politician is win the next goddamn election. And another
yeah.
one that Mike Gravel told me was every senator looks in the mirror and sees a president. So they don't want to give up their seats, right? They especially powerful people like that. I think that
It,
Trump's
it,
going to
sounds,
have to be jettisoned.
it,
That's
it
what I'm
sounds
hoping.
like we better. It sounds like we better start wondering what President J.D. Vance will be like,
Well,
right? And I think a whole lot less of him than I did before he became Veep, right?
I never heard of him till before he became Veep, and I've never thought much of him. To be honest with you. So
Let's not get ahead of ourselves here, okay? Let me play the devil's advocate.
okay,
As much as I wish to think you're right, Joe,
yeah.
and you, Patrick, who's in charge? ICE is in charge. We have the black and tans from Ireland. We have the black shirts from Italy, the brown shirts from Germany. We have a militia now of tens and tens and tens of thousands that are being sent all around. We know the states that they're coming to, okay? We know they're building facilities in many of these states. And the national security strategy that was unveiled in November of last year, yeah, it talks about the Western Hemisphere, but it talks first and foremost about the homeland. We have to have enough troops available to protect the homeland, okay? Now, Trump has already shown himself quite willing to send troops, U.S. troops, into cities, mostly democratically controlled cities, or ICE, and that's what worries me. Now, ICE and one judge now, a district judge, has blessed the notion that ICE can go ahead and invade a place or capture somebody without any regard for the Fourth Amendment. And I just kind of, most Americans have studied the Constitution, but the Fourth Amendment is my favorite one, okay? It's short, so I can memorize it, okay? But it's really important because the patriots that freed our continent, freed our country from the British, were subjected to general warrants where the soldiers could come in and do what they wanted in our house, including mess around with our women, okay? So here it is. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, places, effects, and other things from unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue except upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly defining the places to be searched or the people to be seized, period. That used to mean something. As a matter of fact, I'll just maybe one more kind of tangent here. When the Constitution was being written, it was being written by George Mason, who lived in a house near where I used to live in Arlington, Virginia. Mason and Madison. Madison cooperated. When Madison had a final draft, he said, George, here it is. And George says, sorry, Jim, I don't know how to tell you this, but I can't advocate that. And I said, come on, George, you drafted most of it. It doesn't have a Bill of Rights, Jim. I can't in good conscience vouch for it. Now, in those days, gentlemen kept promises. Madison said, George, if you come out against this, it's over. So would you promise just to keep quiet about this? And I promise you that I will send horsemen up and down the eastern seaboard, and we'll get that Bill of Rights ratified right quick. Both of them kept their promise, and all of a sudden you had the Bill of Rights. So the Fourth Amendment was key. And now we have even a judge of a lower court, not the Supreme Court, saying, "Oh, well, you don't need the Fourth Amendment. You don't need that very succinct and descriptive thing of what's necessary to have a warrant. You don't need that anymore. ICE can do their own warrant." So what I'm saying is this is really serious, because if you look at the National Defense Strategy issued in November, and if you look at the Pentagon strategy issued just last month, you get a picture of a president who would be willing to do what we all would abhor, but need to be ready to deal with. And I'm not sure the American people are ready to deal with that right now. And I suspect there will be real problems before the midterms, and that those problems will be caused by a desperate president who doesn't want to be impeached and thinks he has unilateral power, who makes people like Dick Cheney and the imperial presidency, puts them to shame with what he does openly and with the support of the media. And that's the core. If the media can turn around here and support the Constitution, that might make a difference. So that's just the other side. That's my devil's advocate thing. I hope you're right, Joe, and I hope you're right,
Well, I
Patrick.
think the media has been okay on the ICE issue, liberal media anyway, not the Fox and those Sky News, those kinds of people. But I think Vance will be perfectly able to use ICE the way Trump has. But I think you're right, Ray, and it reminds me that the in the 1930s, the established order, the capitalist order, was under threat from revolt in Russia, in Kiel, in Germany. There was a revolution. So socialism, communism was a real threat to the leaders then, and we got brown shirts. We got big capitalists supporting Hitler, supporting Mussolini to maintain the order that they felt was under threat. The Epstein files, in my view, are putting the system under threat. It's exposing the rot. In a way, not like the revolutions in the 1930s and revolutionary movements, but this is a revolutionary point. If, as I said, I think these files continue to reveal the filth and the rot at the top. So, how to protect not only Trump's own skin? I'm sure he would use ICE for that, no question. But also the whole class that as being exposed here. So I think that's a very, very interesting point you made to mention ICE in relation to what we were talking about Epstein and the changes that could be bringing about. It's very frightening.
If ICE becomes instrumental in this way, the river has burst the banks big time, I would say, right? We're talking about major disorder throughout the country. I would reckon, you know.
I should recommend a conversation between Ralph Nader and Larry Wilkinson on Ralph Nader's podcast that I happened to hear just yesterday, was from February 8th, when they're talking about the real possibility of violent revolt in the United States in this context. It's chilling. So this is being openly discussed in ways I never thought would be possible, that the United States could come to this point. Um, if we don't have anything more to say about that, I wanted to bring up Iran and the Middle East. Now, Netanyahu was in the White House on Wednesday, and apparently he left without what he wanted. What did he want? He wants regime change in Iran. He wants Trump to resume the war that they had to end in June after 12 days because Israel was running out of interceptor missiles, and I know that from the Wall Street Journal. And they had to beg Trump to end this thing, and the Ukrainians did end it when they had maybe Israel on the ropes. Well, apparently they haven't replenished their stocks of intercept missiles. The U.S. used up 25% of their THAAD interceptor missiles in that 12-day period. They don't have a replenishment of that. It seems totally insane for Israel to want to start this war now because the Iranians could do even greater damage if it goes on. And yesterday, just a few hours ago, or before this program this morning, I was able to read a piece in Haaretz in which now Trump is considering an option for a long-term war to bring about regime change. So this is completely contradictory. On the one hand, I've heard that Trump wants to do it in 2 or 3 days, but you cannot overthrow the government in 2 or 3 days. Now he's willing to go weeks. And Israel's willing to withstand unbelievable damage and death and destruction in order to overthrow. We're talking about total absolute insanity here. And I wanted to ask you guys what you've made of Netanyahu's trip and something that Ari Ben Menashe, the former high-ranking military intelligence directorate official from Israel, told our webcast a couple of days ago that he thinks, to bring Epstein back into this, that Israel, which obviously has the Epstein files, because not only was Epstein working for the Israelis, but the Unit 8200 could actually obviously hack and get all of this stuff. They could show Mr. Trump, by the way, Mr. President, you don't want this thing to be found out, do we? Do you, Mr. President? This is when Netanyahu could easily blackmail Trump and to give him what he wants on Iran. Ray, what do you think about where we stand with Iran right now, and whether you think that's a reasonable idea that the Israelis could blackmail Trump with Epstein files on to get their way on Iran?
Yes, I do believe that. As a matter of fact, 3 months ago, uh, before the Epstein files really became au courant, I predicted that the one way to explain Trump's behavior on the genocide in Gaza was that the Israelis had this hold on him, blackmail material from Epstein. Um, so where are we now? The big thing 3 days ago when Netanyahu came here a week before he had intended to, wanted to rush to hear why Trump said that the bilateral talks between the U.S. and Iran, why he said that they were very good. My God, how could they be very good? Did you get any concessions? I mean, did they agree to curtail or abolish or limit their offensive missiles that such a threat? Well, no, no. They told us they weren't working on a nuclear weapon, and I checked with the intelligence people. They said that's right. They're not working on a nuclear weapon, and so yeah, I insist. Trump's word. I insisted to Netanyahu that those talks will continue. Oman, I think, is where they are. We're going to continue those talks. I insist on that. And, says Trump, I made no other undertakings to Netanyahu. Oh, what did they say at the final press conference? Oh, there wasn't any. There wasn't any? What about the communique? Oh, there wasn't any. This is unique. I'm surprised that not many people are pointing this out, but I think Trump is finally realizing that he's been had. Now, how do I explain that? He went to the CIA and said, "Look, can you guys overthrow the Iranian government?" And CIA guys, the operations guys, there's no other answer than, "Yes, sir. We did it in 1953. Yeah, we'll just dust off those files and we know how to do this because they've got the British to help us. Yeah, no problem." My God, crazy. So they use all their agents, okay, and they get them all set, and then they say devalue the real, okay, and then there's economic demonstrations. Now we take care of get our people out of the woodwork, and we use the Starlink to get it going, and all of a sudden the Starlink doesn't work. Oh my God, the Star who put down the Starlink? Almost certainly Russia, okay, maybe China. And so it fizzles, okay? And then Trump says, well, we're not going to do it now. And Netanyahu said, no, not quite now, but now, this week, okay? So what's changed? Not much. Uh, the missiles have not been replenished on the carrier and the other ones that come. Everyone says they're going to run out, the U.S., mind you, will run out of ammunition in about 2 weeks. Iran has made it clear that if the slightest attack is going to be a full-fledged counterattack, not only on U.S. forces, but on U.S. bases in the area and on Israel. Oh, can they attack Israel? You're damn sure. You're damn straight they could. They did in June. They sold their best missiles to the end, and they fired them and hit Israeli sensitive targets just to demonstrate, look, this is what we're going to do next time, okay? Now, what happened? Well, they said when they got in real trouble, the Israelis said to Trump, please, could you call a timeout? Go time out. time out, please. And there was a timeout at the about 20th of June, if memory serves. Now, what's different? Uh, the Russians thought that would be the end of it. And by all reasonable standard, it should have been. And so what did Peskov, Putin's spokesman person, say? He said, well, that's the Iran thing is secondary. We're not going to let that impinge on our attempts to develop good relations with the United States. My God. Well, why do I mention that? Because that's not going to happen this time. This is not going to happen this time. The Russians are giving military aid, and so are the Chinese. And if the Americans decide to attack Iran, they're going to run out of ammunition. And a lot of the Arab states don't want this to go forward either. So what I interpret the incredibly interesting Netanyahu Trump discussions on Tuesday is Netanyahu said, look, we have to decide, we have to get rid of the missiles, and we have to get them to stop supporting rebel groups in the area. And Trump said, well, let's see what happens. It's his famous dictum. And meanwhile, I insist that the negotiation continue. Now, if you want to play devil's advocate and say, well, negotiations were continuing right before the last time Israel and U.S. hit Iran, well, yeah, that's happened. But I think it's different this time. The experience itself speaks for itself. And I think Trump, despite new aircraft carriers and all that other stuff, has finally seen that this is not good for him in any way and will cease and desist. And, he'll work out the kind of appearance of a deal where the Iranians will say, okay, we're not going to work on a nuclear weapon, which they haven't been doing since late 2003, okay, according to the intelligence community. And we'll give some of our enriched uranium to Russia or Turkey to safeguard. And the Iranians aren't going to say anything about supporting rebel groups, and that's going to be it. But it'll be enough for Trump to say, well, all right, I faced down the Iranians. They're not going to build a nuclear weapon, and they're going to give enrichment, and, blah, blah, blah. And I think he'll back off. That's my hope. Now, predicting the innately unpredictable Trump, it's always a major challenge, right? But that's my best guess right now.
Give you, Patrick.
It's a guessing game at this point. Okay, no one can get very far beyond calculated guesses. I'm not so. I hope Ramo is right, but I'm not so optimistic as that. Why the rushed trip to Washington after the negotiations? Where were they? Abu Dhabi?
Oman.
Oman. And Netanyahu declared 3 conditions. The ballistic missile program has got to go. No more regional allies or alliances with other groups, Shia or otherwise, and no more enrichment. This is effectively to demand that Iran surrender its sovereignty. Okay, and Netanyahu knows. Did he call these red lines? Or I think he did. Netanyahu knows that the Iranians have made. How could he not? The Iranians have made very, very clear these are not on the table. So what was his point?
War.
The argument.
Yeah.
The argument is that his intent was to and rushed to the White House with that absolutely preposterous motorcade, if I may if I may add. The videotape of that motorcade was bloody unbelievable, right? If you haven't seen it, Joe, go
No, I
look at
haven't.
it. It's just the emperor has arrived, right? Why did he rush to Washington? The argument is, and I think I subscribe, that his intent is to absolutely scuttle the diplomatic channel with the Iranians. Okay, I think what's next point. It does appear fairly insane that an attack of the kind apparently contemplated would go forward. But my argument here is, with Netanyahu, insanity is not a sound counter argument. Okay, um, I honestly, the military buildup. We're now going to have a second carrier.
Yes.
All right. What's that all about? That's an awful lot of
Firepower.
bluff.
Yeah.
I think, and I want to mention something I read in the Times yesterday. I think the last weeks have been spent in Washington, Langley, the Pentagon, wherever, and in Israel, and in certain of the Arab capitals, calculating in the most granular fashion the vulnerabilities that an attack would open up the states, Israel and its allies. What would their vulnerabilities be, and addressing those vulnerabilities one by one, right? How many nautical miles off the coast does an aircraft carrier have to be in order to be out of range of missiles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And the Times, I want to mention, it's a certain low-level skill to read the Times properly. It's all subtext. but they had a piece yesterday saying, goodness gracious, the military, after Trump made these statements about the massive armada and all that, the military woke up and said, goodness, we're not ready. And they have spent the last weeks getting ready. And this is what you need to know about how they're getting ready. Now, why would the Times publish a piece like that? I think preparations, the public opinion is being prepared for the potential of an attack. And I'll stay with potential. We don't know, but it looks to me like the tilt is a go. Colonel McGregor the other night put it down to a week to 10 days. He might extend that time frame now, but that was his view the other. It just does not seem so far-fetched, and we need to go back to the point one or the other or both of you made a few minutes ago. The Israelis, by way of, what's his name, Ben Manash?
Ben Menashe. Ben Menashe.
Yeah, the Israelis have it on Trump if they want to use it, right? I'm kind of not with Ramo about. I hope Ray's right, and I can't say he's wrong, because we're all stabbing not quite in the dark. But my tilt is it's probably now a when rather than a whether or an if.
I think that Ray's right that Trump has to find a way out of this. Netanyahu said, yeah, let the negotiations go on. He knows Iran will never agree to give up the ballistic missiles. Iran will not stop supporting the Houthis, the Hezbollah, Hamas, etc. And they will not go to zero enrichment. They should have gone back to the nuclear deal that Obama, and we have to give him credit, that he actually talked to the Russians and the Chinese. Imagine that. And came up with this extraordinarily important deal that worked. It worked in Iran. It was working. That was the worst thing that Trump did at the very beginning. That was one of his first acts in his first term. was to listen to Mir and Adelson and the Israelis and rip up that deal. That's why we're in the mess we are right now. And the Iranians are willing to go back to something like that, but not to zero enrichment. It's not necessary. It was
Yeah.
working. They're never going to give up the ballistic missiles. That was not in the original deal. And you know what? So we've got that deal that lost, and we've got those treaties on Ukraine for a new security architecture in December 2021. That treaties that Russia drafted for the U.S. and NATO never even discussed by the United States. The diplomatic framework for the resolution of both of these conflicts that we're talking about, both of which can lead to nuclear exchanges, are there. They're written. They're there, and we've got a bunch of buffoons and maniacs coming from Israel to manipulate this guy. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, let me interject here. What I see is Trump turning to the CIA and saying, "I thought you could do what you did in 1953," and they say, "Well, yeah, it's a little more complicated, and besides, we don't have Starlink, we can't get in touch with all." And so, and then he goes to the military, and the military says, "The CIA told you what? The CIA told you what?" And the military says, "Look, we could do a lot of damage, but we can't remove the regime. We had a pretty good deal back under Obama. My guess is that they'll come up with something like the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and there's a lot of lipstick put on various pigs, and I'm sure that Trump will do his best to say, well, look, we faced them down, we got them to do what the JCPOA did, okay? Now, the
Can't do that.
alternative,
Sorry, he cannot do that because he will lose face because he ripped that deal up, and Netanyahu will never accept that. And we're gonna
I'm
then
not
say,
saying I'm not
yeah,
saying reinstitute the JCPO.
right,
I'm just saying reinstitute the major parts of it, okay?
right,
And make believe it's a new deal. They can
yeah.
do that.
And
Congress will
Ray,
support
Netanyahu
it.
won't
Yeah,
accept that.
it would have Trump's name on it. Another thing with
yeah,
Trump's
they
name.
put a JCPOA Trump slash
Yeah,
Trump. Yeah,
the
yeah.
OT, yes.
But here's the deal is um, last time these hypersonic missiles that fly between 10 and 12 times the speed of sound cannot be defended against. We had Iron Dome, we had Patriot missiles, we had everything there in Israel, and they got through and they did considerable damage about which we're not informed mostly, okay? So here are the Israelis trying to think of, well, you think we can do this again? Well, if we get the US in, and if things go bad, we do have a nuke. We do have a Samson option. And so if we can't persuade the US to go in with both feet really, really hard, all their assets, we could just tell them, okay, we'll finish the job with one of our nuclear weapons. Then the US will have to go in and obliterate Iran and the real deal. So you're shaking your head, Joe, but I think that Netanyahu realizes that his country can be obliterated, if I can borrow the term, if the Iranians retaliate against Israel, which they have promised to do. So, with all this taken into account, I think that we can say, well, Colonel McGregor's been saying this for 3 months. Okay, it was supposed to be last weekend. I mean, the military analysts know that the capability is there. What's missing is the intentions. And the intentions have to weigh in all these factors about obliterating Israel, obliterating our bases in the area, and the fact that the Gulf states don't want us to do it. Okay. So they call me Pollyanna, but I've been saying all along it's less likely than more likely that Trump is going to do anything more than bluster and bluff, and then in Oman work out a deal that he can dress up as an Iranian back down, and hopefully we can avoid the worst. I hope I'm right. Can I guarantee it? Of course not. And I'm in the minority. I mean, Patrick, you're in with the majority. I'd say maybe I can't think of anybody else who's been consistently saying that the downside far outweighs the upside
Right.
of
Raimondo,
attacking Iran.
Raimondo, okay, let's say you're right. Okay. The the Israelis are in a seven-front war in behalf of Eretz Israel, and they are not going to be. I mean, Iran might go away for the Americans with some kind of newly concocted agreement, but it's not going to go away for the Israelis. They are not going to desist. So let's assume you're right and sort of game this out. Where would that leave the Israelis? They would not stop. It would be more, and the Iranians have made it plain. We're sick and tired of sort of attenuated attacks and low level this and that. We've had
Right.
enough. Hit us again, and we're going all the way. And
Right.
I think they're quite right that enough is enough with this stuff. Um, and my question is, where would the outcome you propose leave the Israeli strategy? What's the thought there?
Well, Patrick, it would leave the Israelis very disappointed, just as they were after Netanyahu finished talking to Trump 3 days ago. Very disappointed. Do they fear an attack from Iran? No. Only if the US and Israel attack Iran. That's not, if I'm right, that's not going to happen. So the Israelis will do their bit in Syria and in Gaza and all that kind of stuff with full US support, I'm sorry to say. But, if they thought that Iran was a real threat, it's a concocted threat. We've had Netanyahu saying they're a week or a month, or Trump himself says they might be a month away from a nuclear weapon, whereas the U.S. intelligence briefing, less than a year old, and the new defense strategy says they are not working on a nuclear weapon. So it's going to be it'll take a little art, and maybe Rubio isn't up to it, but maybe Witkoff should say, look, there's a way out of this. Let's go to Oman. Let's work with the Iranians and say, look, I don't really want to do this. Let's put some lipstick on this pig and let's get this behind us. That's what I think would be going. And yeah, would the Israelis be disappointed? Well, yeah, they damn well should be disappointed because for the first time, there was no communique. There was no joint press conference. There was no hugging and kissing between Netanyahu and Trump. And that's a
The
good thing in
Israelis,
my view.
Ray, the Israelis are not very good at being disappointed, right?
Yeah.
But I hope you're right, and I have no need to be right on this. I defer to you. Once again, I return to my initial point. We simply don't know. Nobody gathered here knows, right? We're
Ray,
conjecturing.
Ray,
You
I
know?
think you're right that Trump will try to do that and pull that off. But
Mhm.
as Patrick just pointed out, will they be satisfied with being disappointed? You brought up the possibility of Israel using the Samson option. I was shaking my head, not because I didn't believe you, but because it's unbelievable that that could happen. It was out of dismay that I was shaking my head. So I worry about that. I don't think Israel will stand for a deal like that. And as Patrick points out, and we might be reading on the front page of the New York Times that Trump indeed raped and murdered a 12-year-old girl, thanks to the Israeli release of that stuff. I mean, that's
Yeah,
what
Well,
they could do.
could happen. I think that the military may be key here. Our military has made clear to Trump what the equities are here. And I think they've told him, look, all these fighters and bombers and stuff, they have a limited radius. They can't even reach some parts of Iran. Iran is really big. They used to talk about Iraq. It's as big as Texas. Well, Iran as big as Europe, for God's sake. All right. The Iranians are not going to be defeated. So I see that sense may in the end prevail. And, I've been wrong before. So that's just my best guess. But I see the equities, not just the military capabilities, but the intentions and the overall need to avoid obliterating Israel as coming into fore here. The Israelis will be disappointed, But it would be another thing if they saw a real existential threat from Iran. There is none. There
Yes,
is none.
of course there
So,
isn't. Just like
yeah.
there isn't Russian is essential threat to Western Europe. Same
Mhm.
BS. And they're both being used for the same purposes.
Yeah.
Um, what about public opinion on this? We talked a little bit here about how public opinion is changing on in Europe about NATO funding Ukraine. Israel's taken a huge hit in public relations since the genocide. Absolutely the worst ever. And Netanyahu's talking all the time about controlling social media, and they're giving $7,000 for each post to the people who have like 4 to 5 million followers on X. So, I mean, this is a huge issue for the Israelis. That's the war. They didn't beat Hamas, and they're not beating public opinion right now. What about how it turning against the Israelis attacking Iran? We saw in Australia where I am, I was in the middle of this riot. There was the president of Israel came here, Herzog, and the people demonstrated, and the police moved in with horses and pepper spray, and I was there in the middle of it. And you posted a tweet about that and said, "What? That's the kind of reception Netanyahu needs in Washington." And he didn't get that reception, did he?
Yeah.
This is a real problem that the American public is not really weighing in on this one, as the Australian public did.
Joe, did they put a horse's head in your bed there in Sydney?
No, they didn't see
Uh,
that movie. They haven't seen that one. That was Godfather 2, wasn't it?
you were woken up by a horse's head, were you not?
Yeah, that's quite funny. But I never saw a horse's head that large before, I could tell you that. It was like almost nose to nose with me.
Tell the story. People need to know.
Well, I was covering the thing, filming. You can go to Consortium News and see our 16-minute film that our producer, Cathy Vogan, edited and that I filmed. And there were 10, 20, 30,000 people at the town hall in Sydney to protest this murderous genocidal maniac, Herzog, that the was forced upon the prime minister to invite by the Zionist Federation of Australia. And he came, and Albanese, the prime minister, said would create social cohesion. This was, of course, after the Bondi massacre in December, the 15 innocent people killed by two ISIS-related inspired terrorists and nothing to do with Palestine. They were Indian Muslims, nothing to do with Palestinians, but immediately they conflated the protests here and around the world against the genocide with this terrorist attack. Immediately, Netanyahu said that within hours after the attack, and the envoy to terror against anti-Semitism here said the same thing, and it was just disgusting. And it happened all the way up until this protest last Monday, this week, in which there were 500 police, and while Herzog was meeting with very well-heeled Jews in eastern suburbs of Sydney, where they live, at the ICC. He was speaking at the ICC, the International Convention Center, in Darling Harbour in Sydney, the wrong ICC he was speaking at. Uh, while he was there, this protest went on, and then a police officer actually gets up, addresses the crowd, and says, "We're asking you to sit tight for 30 minutes because we want to clear out the square in front of the town hall of those protesters. So they're not close to the building and you're not in danger, but please wait here. We don't want any kind of clash between the two." And somebody in the audience calls out and calls us, the people in the square, a Jew-hating mob. You could hear this on the video. So it was coordinated with the governors, the premier of the state of New South Wales, the prime minister. They sent the police in to clear it out. They kettled the people in. There was nowhere to go, and then they started moving in and arrested many people, beat many people with fists. It was just horrendous, and gave a black eye to Australia. But that didn't happen in Washington.
Well, talk about the horse's head, Joe? Weren't you
Well,
over in the fire?
when I was filming the front lines, it was the very beginning of this violence. I was there when it began at the end of the street by the town hall. They put a barricade there and people were stopped. And then they went in and just plucked people out of the crowd and told us to move back. Every once in a while they were trying to push us. Then suddenly I saw the horse come at us. And this head was very close to mine. And I turned around. I think that's why I turned from the horse. And at that moment, the pepper spray came to the side of my face and to my nostril. I didn't get it full face, thank God, because that was not very pleasant, even the little bit that I got. That was my first pepper spraying experience, or capsicum spray, as they call it here. So it was not good. It was not a good situation. But I want to see that in the U.S. when Netanyahu comes to bomb Iran. He's far more powerful than Herzog is, a ceremonial president. And yet the people here in Australia, stood up and then they got beaten. People are in hospital. Oh, a woman broke her, a 69-year-old woman broke her back. Other people had their arms twisted so much that they were bleeding out of their elbow. It's go and watch my film and there's other films circulating. A group of Muslim men praying on the ground there, facing Mecca, were picked up and literally hurled by the police, which was the worst possible video. That I'm sure it's gone viral in the Middle East. I mean, Australia, that was the one video, the one thing. I wasn't there to film that, but I saw that. That was the worst thing the police could have possibly have done. Now they're kind of trying to apologize. Um, it was an ugly scene, but people stood up against Israel, and I'm saying the American people need to do the same.
Joe, did the ICE train the is Australian police or vice versa?
Well, I've heard that they were trained in Israel, like so many other police departments,
Like the ICE people. Yeah. Okay.
like ICE, like the New York Police, NYPD, and etc. Yes. Some people compared that to Israeli soldiers, the way they arrest Palestinians. The scenes that we saw in the streets of genteel, quiet, peaceful Sydney, Australia. It was unbelievable thing that had happened. We might end it there. I wanted to say, though, that there was, if you have anything to say about this Palestine action, I think this was an extraordinary event of people power. The jury disobeyed a judge and let out the 6 members of Palestine Action who had entered Elbit Systems, a arms manufacturing factory in the UK, where in Bristol, I believe it was, where they were manufacturing drones to be used in Gaza to kill innocent civilians. And those people were let off, 6 of them. And then the High Court of England and Wales just this week said that the designation of Palestine Action as a terrorist organization was illegal against the Starmer government. A huge, huge blow to Starmer and his government. This group was doing direct action. They go in and they put blood, or they hammer an airplane, or they tried to damage the drones. They were only hitting property. They cannot be seen as violent. They're not legally not attacking people. And they've called them terrorists. And then under the Terrorism Act, they've arrested thousands of people who've held up signs saying, I support Palestine Action. And that is enough under the Terrorism Act of 2002 to be arrested. So this was a huge, huge victory in the UK.
Yeah. So was my feeling watching the Sydney situation from a considerable distance, and then the Palestine Action situation. We may not get to it, but there's now a concerted effort to discredit Francesca Albanese.
Yes.
I have a sort of upside down view of these things. I think they have. I think they have, let's say, a sort of net positive. They're net positive indicators because Israel is not any longer going down at all well or peacefully, right? There is a gathering momentum against the Zionist state. I like the way these things look, right? Attacking Albanese is plainly and simply an act of desperation, might be too strong, but in that direction, that's how I look at it.
Well,
I guess
somebody earlier today said it reminds me of South Africa in the 70s or so, and I agree, but I think I was part of that anti-apartheid scene, right? I agree, but I think the popular sentiment gathering against the Zionist state is moving much more swiftly.
Yeah, the caveat I would add is that the vast majority of people who live in the Zionist state support what's going on. That is really hard to believe, but it is true. And so Netanyahu, uh, he's got to run for re-election, I think, later this year. And he's also facing still some threats about he being held accountable for clear corruption. So he too has these personal reasons to do ridiculous things, and he does have a nuclear weapon. I just hope that our leaders will be sensitive to that and make sure that they let him down with as much ease as possible, but let him down and say, look, we're not going to have a war against Iran because you want us to this time. Forget about it. We'll make sure you can be protected, and we'll try to develop well, we have the Iron Dome don't work, Golden Dome, we're trying, maybe, I don't know, Platinum Dome. Maybe we'll sell you a Platinum Dome. Maybe that will work against these hypersonic missiles. We can't guarantee it, but at least we'll be there to help you. So that's my take on that.
Ray McGovern will leave you that with the last word. Because we've been here for 2 hours, and I want to thank you very much for joining us, for giving us this much time. On a Sunday night, we have it's 10 p.m. on the East Coast of the U.S., which means there's 2 hours left in the week. So something could still happen. We pushed this program right up to the end of the week in case they don't attack Iran. We'll miss it. But if they do in the next 2 hours, we will have to cover that on next week's show. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Cathy
Most
Vogan,
welcome.
here in Sydney as our producer. And for the world this week and Consortium News, this is Joe Lauria saying goodbye.
Get out your notebook. There's more.
If you are a consumer of independent news, then the first place you should be going to is Consortium News, and please do try to support them when you can. It doesn't have its articles behind a paywall. It's free for everyone. It's one of the best news sites out there, and it's been in the business of independent journalism and adversarial independent journalism for over 2 decades. I hope that with the public's continuing support of Consortium News, it will continue for a very long time to come. Thank you so much.